Well, hello and welcome to Insight with Political Tours, the travel company led by reporters. If you're to believe the polls, Trump already has it in the bag, and the rest of the Republican field might as well pack their bags and go home. But with the former president facing 94 indictments and a year to go until Election Day, who knows? Currently, 7 other Republican hopefuls are headed to Iowa, the first in the nation primary. And we're here to take a look at their prospects with 2 veterans of Iowa politics. They're both Democrats, dare I say it, and take a critical look at their own candidate, Joe Biden. We have with us Katy Siddall. Hello and welcome, Katy.
Hi.
Hey, Katy, you're a director at Progress Iowa, which is a sort of left-leaning pro-democratic group. And we also have Mike Draper, who's the owner of RayGun, probably Iowa and the Midwest, if not the world's best-known political store. Hello and welcome, Mike.
Hello, thank you.
Good to have you with us, Mike. We've met you before back in 2020. I'm not too sure we've met Katy, but I'm hoping we're going to get to see her in a couple of months' time. Katy, just to start with, tell us what you do. You've got an enticing whiteboard behind you, which is sort of, I think, is sort of a secret Democrat strategy to win the next election. What do you do?
I've got a lot of formulas back there. Yeah. My name is Katy Siddall. I work at Progress Iowa. I'm the messaging director. So I have a background in policy research and nonprofit work. And so at Progress Iowa, I research message development. I kind of do a little bit of opinion research where I test messages in front of Iowans to see which ones are most effective. I compare them to conservative messages and see which one does better. And I try to help progressives in the state speak more in unison and also use the most effective message.
Okay, that's great. That means you've got hands in both pies, as it were, so you can tell what's going on both in the sort of conservative heartland as well as the Democrats, but your focus is obviously on the left. Mike, hold up a postcard, say why you exist. I mean, I think you sort of have to exist. Why, or where is Iowa, for starters?
Well, yeah. So I am sitting in Des Moines, Iowa, which is the center of Iowa, the capital, if you will. And Iowa is essentially in the center of America. It looks a little bit
basically
like this.
you're trying to help journalists who are lost, aren't you? Because they just got comes around every year, every 4 years, and still journalists don't know where you are, who the people are, what the issues are.
Yeah, so I run a company called RayGun, so it has been called the greatest store in the universe by RayGun, which is a real honor. If you're not going to compliment you can't go waiting for other people to compliment you. You're going to have to do it yourself. We do screen printing, design, product. We have 9 locations. 6 of them are in Iowa. So our main one where I'm sitting is Des Moines, and then we have Ames, Iowa City, Cedar Rapids, Cedar Falls, and Davenport, and then Chicago, Omaha, and Kansas City. We are not a progressive organization in any standpoint. We're just a store, but a lot of our product tends to be progressive.
Do you get? I mean, you do get candidates stopping by every now and then, but they're more likely to be Democrats.
And so we are this
Republicans.
kind of amalgamation of funny geographic sports-related product, but then also these progressive products. And way back when we first started, we were across from Obama's 2008 caucus headquarters. We were kind of a little too fringe for candidates to stop by. But in the last election, when the Democratic field was wide open and the Republican field, we had every single candidate except for Biden and Trump stop by the store. So the Democratic candidates, from Hillary Clinton to Bernie Sanders to, the lower tier, all of them would stop by for pictures with us. And the Republican candidates would walk through the store just for entertainment, but would not want to be photographed while they are in here. And so we have lots of products.
Let's hold that for a moment.
Politics.
Let's hold the merchandise for a moment. But the point is, you've got your finger on the pulse. You have to have your finger on the pulse. You've got to know what the issues are. I remember last time you produced a T-shirt that came out more quickly than the Democrats produced the results.
Yeah, the last caucuses, we had a shirt that was on our table, and it said this shirt was designed, printed, and put out for sale before the results of the Iowa caucuses were announced. So that was kind of, I guess the kids would call that meta. We have greetings from Ohio, the great potato state.
I have that card here too.
And so this is obviously Iowa. Ohio is a different state, and then the potato state is Idaho. But even to people in America, it's all kind of the same thing. This is Iowa. You may be thinking of Ohio. That's a picture of Cleveland. You'll see a city, I guess, that looks a little like that, but not exactly. One for both Katie and I, Iowa. Your mom says all your friends are moving back. But then we also kind of drift into the more that I think hooks people where they want to come in, but then you drift into like public money for public schools.
We're going to hold that for a moment, because those issues I want to come back to for a second.
Oh, yeah.
You've just raised an important point. We're going to talk about that in a second. Katie, 2020 had a big effect, didn't it? And I was surprised about this. It was the catastrophe, the failure to get those results out had a big impact on politics in Iowa. Explain how that happened.
Yeah, that was a mess. In the 2020 caucuses, Iowa did not get their results out in time. And there's a lot going on behind that. There's a lot of state party working with the national party to meet new metrics, to achieve new goals on, say, more inclusion and diversity. So access to the polls and whatnot, satellite stations to make sure that folks who are going to this caucus, where you have to physically show up and say who you're for, and then potentially be negotiated into another slot.
The point was it didn't go well, but it was politically damaging. That was what I found surprising, that the repercussions, It wasn't just about organizing the vote. It actually had an impact on who was elected in the next few years afterwards.
Implementing it, getting it done, getting that information to reporters, what that decision on caucus night is supposed to do for the race. We were supposed to be the one, like, kind of picking and deciding who won the caucuses, would go on and do incredibly well, generally, historically, in down the line in the rest of the races, in the rest of the primaries. And Buttigieg won the Iowa primary caucus, and I think he probably did better than he would have if he hadn't won the Iowa caucuses. But still, if that had gotten out that evening, that night, if the reporters and everyone knew immediately who exactly won the caucuses, it could have changed the landscape for sure.
Okay, so what's happened politically in Iowa since then, in terms of who dominates it?
Well, I think the poll to the right is more than the caucuses, although the caucuses definitely play a role. You have a lot that I think emotionally, for a lot of people that went on, the election previously, how did we even go from Obama to Trump? That's a whole hour-long conversation in and of itself. And then on top of that, you have the party unable to implement that app right, the app that they used the night to report the numbers and sort of show that we could continue on. And obviously today it's having an impact on Democrats and the strength of Democrats in the state, because when you have the caucuses, that brings a lot of attention, a lot of money, a lot of foot traffic, whether it's economic money, just purely economical money. Donations to your candidates, attention from the top of the ticket. It changes everything. So we're in a funky position now where we don't have that. So how do we behave? How do Iowa Democrats have to go forward? And I've been trying to talk to folks about this because I have a vested and personal interest in it. And, we need to do things like Ohio and Michigan are thinking about and trying to get done. We need to act like states that haven't had that asset and are proving that they can win governor's races, they can win big seats.
Okay, so just to explain the point here is that you've got a Republican governor, the state legislature is Republican, but basically most of the senior posts are Republican dominated across the state, and so Iowa has become more conservative in the last 4 years, and that's the environment in which you have the first primary in the nation taking place. So having said that, what are the issues that matter to Iowa Republicans? I know you focus on Democrats, but you also look at the Republicans too. What matters to Iowa Republicans?
Yeah, I test messages on everyone to see how they do. I think that a lot of times Republicans want things to stay the same. Obviously, right now they really care about at least a number of them care about abortion, and that's something that our governor's been fighting for full-throatedly, on banning the access to abortion. We've seen education.
In terms of abortion rights, what exists within the state constitution or state legislative?
So our state constitution used to protect the right to abortion, and that recently has gone through the courts, and the courts have sort of said it's not a state constitutional right anymore. And so now we're battling back and forth on a bill that would ban abortion after 6 weeks.
Okay, and so that kind of thing would appeal to conservatives, to evangelicals.
Yes.
And then in terms of what are the other constituents within the state? So you've got conservative, evangelical, religious voters. Who else have you got?
Oh, business, tax, not Mike's business, of course, obviously.
We're not big enough to have lobbyists.
Big wealthy businesses with lobbyists, seeking subsidies and things like that. Those Republicans, nostalgia, like I said, things not to change. They want to have more control. They want to see strength. They want to see someone putting folks at the, controlling the border. We'll do that in air quotes. And, they say they're engaged in foreign policy, like they care. It's not a state issue, obviously, but they say they care about foreign policy.
Okay, Mike, just to follow up on that, geographically, how does that work out? And I presume you've got Republicans in more rural areas, and the cities are more Democratic leaning on the center of them. Just how does that work? Just if you could describe the state and who's where.
Yeah, I mean, Iowa is a little different from, in Illinois or Michigan, and that in Illinois, it's like Chicago and then everything else. And Michigan is even heavily dominated by Detroit. Iowa's never really have that where there isn't a giant gap between rural and urban. So Des Moines is the largest metro. It's about 700,000. It's dominated less by industry than it is by insurance. So Iowa, the kind of mix is mainly white collar jobs, agriculture, and the energy that mixes between those. And so Iowa, Democrats are going to win about 6 or 7 counties. So it's Des Moines, and then just to the north, Ames, where Iowa State is, Johnson County, where Iowa City is, Cedar Rapids, Cedar Falls, Waterloo, which is another college town, and then the Quad Cities in eastern Iowa. So it's kind of spread out, and so that's what I think is kind of interesting about Iowa, is that it's not a sharp, cleave. I grew up in a little town, graduated with 30 kids, and I'm in Des Moines. So there's a lot more mixing between, I think, urban and rural across the state. And in terms of, industry, demographics, all of that stuff, Iowa's an interesting case. But it is, I think a lot of people in America, in Iowa especially, are looking, Obama won Iowa in 2008 by 8 points. So just blew everybody out of the water. We had the current agriculture secretary, Tom Vilsack, was our governor for 8 years, followed by a Democratic governor, Chet Culver. The Democrats kind of ran everything in the early 2000s. Even before that, it was more moderate Republicans for 20 years.
So you shouldn't take its Republican-leaning stance for granted. It's not.
Well, yeah, that's what people can't quite figure out is Obama won by 8 points, extremely popular, and then Trump wins by 10 points. But then in the last election, you would think maybe there's a backlash in that from Democrat or from Republican back to Democrat. And you saw that in some states where Michigan went more blue, Minnesota went more blue, Kansas went more blue. So even the last election, it wasn't like a wave year nationally. But in Iowa in particular, only one Democrat held statewide office, Rob Sand. And I think he's the state auditor and spent $2 million, blew out his competitor in terms of fundraising and barely held his seat. And he is a popular Democrat. So I think a lot of Democrats were totally mystified by how they could get blown out, so thoroughly in a state that is not necessarily what has the shift been is, I think, as mysterious to some of us on the ground as it is to national people. But I think if you can figure out that shift, it is going to unlock a lot when it comes to messaging.
Okay, well, let's talk about the candidates themselves. Katy, let's put Trump to one side just for the moment because he's so far out ahead in the polls. Just from your perspective, who struck you? Who do you think's engaging with voters the best in the best way in terms of sort of Iowa priorities?
Well, Kim Reynolds' best friend is Ron DeSantis, who she just endorsed. And it's some people might be, and just to mention him briefly, some folks might be wondering, like, what's the calculus in her endorsing DeSantis over
Kim Reynolds, the Republican governor since when? When was she elected?
2018.
Initially, she was never elected. She was the lieutenant governor to the longest serving Republican governor, and he stepped aside, and essentially
But a really popular figure within Iowa.
Yep, now she is.
Yeah, now. So she recently endorsed DeSantis and has been incredibly close to him for some time. It seems like there's been some work from an evangelical leader, Bob Vanderplatz, to really help elevate DeSantis, some of that quietly, some of that not so quietly. And then the other is Nikki Haley at this point, because we just saw a couple people drop out after the last GOP primary debate. It really seemed like Nikki Haley and Ron DeSantis were the only ones who came out of that with any power. So it really is those two versus Trump. And so the question is, like, are people getting that strength from Nikki Haley? She's been performing well. She seems a little more socially adept than DeSantis, but DeSantis through Reynolds has really deep roots here right now.
Okay, and you talked about Vanderplatz, who's a sort of evangelical leader. This really struck me. I mean, we went to a Trump rally back in 2020, and the first person they had on the stage was a Hispanic evangelical lay preacher, and she said, "Dear Lord, we thank you, God, for the gift of Donald Trump." And you can't quite believe it as you're watching this philanderer, person who's completely unreliable. But for him, they could do no better. So I'm trying to figure out, does that wash, Mike? Does that wash with evangelicals up in Sioux City? Around there, that kind of is it Sioux Center? I can't remember those two.
Yeah. So there's a bunch of there's Sioux Center, there's Sioux City, there's South Sioux City, which is actually in Nebraska, and then there's Sioux Falls, which is in South Dakota. Right. It's where Iowa. It's the most conservative corner of Iowa. I mean, one thing I have thought a lot is that there is this like major disconnect between top and bottom, in that on the Republican side and the Democratic side too, which we can get to later. But on the Republican side, the issues that play really well at the top are school choice issue, defunding public schools, taking books out of libraries, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And they support candidates that are for that on the national level. But then in this last round of elections in Iowa, which were mainly school boards and local elections, the, anti-book banning progressive slate just blew the book banning slate out of the water across the entire state.
Okay. This is basically culture wars in a way, isn't it? So
the culture war stuff plays well nationally, but in a state like Iowa, where the public schools, which are in the UK, public is private, which doesn't make any sense because public is like a public park isn't a private, but whatever. I don't want to tell you about the language.
Yeah.
But I think it is one of those things where a private school is you pay money for, and mostly in Iowa you have a couple religious private schools, but mainly public schools are really important. And so at the local level, a lot of those culture war issues do not translate at all into victories. So a lot of the Republicans lose at the really base level on the same issues that they win on nationally. And so that's what's so odd is you can have a guy like Trump who none of them would want to have dinner. I mean, if his last name weren't Trump, you wouldn't invite him to dinner. You wouldn't put him in charge of your town or your school, or your women, definitely. But then at a national level, he can do no wrong. So that's what I think is so tricky about the messaging, is that the messaging can work nationally, but then be a loser on the most local level.
Katie, let's pick up on those two issues. Let's talk about school funding and libraries. The library issue, I mean, I was just reading about this earlier. Just tell us what was put on the ballot most recently. Has it? I think.
We had a really interesting win in a place called Pella, Iowa, which is my longtime, rival. I grew up neighboring Pella in Newton, and then I went to its rival college, Simpson. So it's a weird warmness that I feel for Pella right now, and having overturned a possible book ban. The legislature tried to get oversight of the Pella Public Library.
How big a place are we talking about? Resolution 6442. How big is this?
It's got to be about the same size as Newton, which is about 15,000 people.
So tiny.
Yeah, they're small towns. And they tried to take away the librarian's ability to decide what books they buy, what books they put on their shelves. And it wasn't a huge margin, but they beat it. And this is a really conservative town. They do have big business. They have Vermeer and Pella windows, I believe, but they've got to attract workers. But still, they were able to, a very conservative town was able to say, don't ban books in my town. And this is the town when I was at Tulip Time a year or two ago, there were signs in almost every single yard, about boys are boys and girls are girls sort of thing.
And this, I think there's state legislation that bans the holding of books that have any description or image of what might be called a sex act.
Yeah. It's pretty broad language. It's one of those things of I can't remember which Supreme Court justice had said, but when they asked to define pornography, he says, well, I can't define pornography, but I know it when I see it.
Mike, can you hold up your school's card, your school sticker, and then I get Katy to explain it? Because this comes on to, as we were saying, public schools here means Eton, Wellington, and Harrow. Public schools in the States mean state-funded schooling.
Yeah, I mean, we have, one that's pretty basic is public money for public schools. And that was tied to what here is called a school voucher bill, which is totally probably meaningless jargon to anybody outside America, but school vouchers is one of the biggest issues across the entire country for multiple reasons. And then an even more inside baseball, Moms for Liberty is one of the slates that runs people for school boards to essentially ban books and take back curriculum. And we have a Moms for Libraries group.
Right.
And so, the public money for public schools is a fight that Iowa unfortunately lost, but also shows the divisions on the Republican side, and that the Republicans have controlled the legislature for the last several sessions. And, these voucher bills, which essentially take public money and can send them to private schools. In the simplest terms, it's the idea that you have about $7,000 in funding per student that normally goes to a school. That's how they calculate school budgets. And instead, if a student goes to a private school, they can take that $7,000 and put them into a private school. These are in place in lots of other states, most famously Betsy DeVos, who was Trump's education secretary and is from Michigan, conservative Christian. She and her family, her family founded Amway Industries in Michigan, kind of pioneered the school voucher, school choice program through the 1990s. So this is something that has been around for a while. It's passed in Florida, Indiana, Arizona. It's kind of all over the place. In Iowa, the firewall that always held it back were the small towns. And even though they were Republican-led, Republican legislators said, well, this is bad for our public school. There are no private schools anywhere near our town. So we would just be losing money. And school vouchers died in the legislative session previous to this. And Kim Reynolds, the Republican governor, actually worked to primary members of her own party to put in more conservative members who would pass this school voucher legislation. And so she got it passed. So the school voucher thing was not a Republican versus Democrat issue. In Iowa, it turned into Republican versus Republican. And it became this litmus test of, are you with Kim Reynolds personally, or are you with your small town? And that is kind of this top to bottom disconnect that I even can't fully make out. And
Okay.
So I'm not sure.
Listen, thank you both very much for that sort of overview of Iowan politics and what issues matter to Iowan voters. Putting that aside, what is giving any candidates the edge? What is giving Nikki Haley an edge? We haven't mentioned that Tim Scott fell out. Mike Pence has withdrawn. You've still got Chris Christie. You've still got Vivek Ramaswamy, who seems as confident as ever. Just tell me how those, for starters, what appeal did they have in Iowa?
Well, I'm wondering if Vivek Ramaswamy is just there to make Nikki Haley look good. I mean, if you watch the GOP primary debates, he is out there. He is saying anything to get attention, and she's really slapping him down hard. He said that she looked like he called Haley just like another version of Dick Cheney in 3-inch heels. And she swatted him back saying they're 5 inches and I don't buy them unless I can run in them. She said she called them ammunition. He had another mention where he said,
he mentioned her daughter using TikTok.
Yes.
And he said, oh, you're against TikTok, but your daughter uses it. Mm-hmm. And then she responded by calling him scum.
Yeah. And to keep her daughter's name out of his mouth.
Yeah. And he now sells T-shirts that say "Rebel Scum." So I mean, but he really is he is like Trump without the charisma. I mean, he's becoming one of the least likable people in America.
But that creates headlines. Does it give any traction in the polls?
Well, I think he thinks it does, but it's one of those things that works for Trump, but it is hard to model your campaign off of Donald Trump, since most of what Trump does not work in the real world. And for somebody like Ramaswamy, it just makes him less and less likable to everybody. I think he is just kind of like, is the impression I get. Whereas I think Nikki Haley, in my opinion, would be the most dangerous candidate to run against Joe Biden. Like if I were the Biden campaign, I would be really worried that Nikki Haley would win.
Agreed. Yeah. A lot of money just went to her with Scott pulling out. A lot of his big funders are now backing Haley.
So is it fair to say that DeSantis would see Haley as his main threat?
I think she's a big threat to him.
Yeah. I mean, DeSantis, she kind of tried to take the middle ground and then is, strong on Israel and that type of stuff. So I think she tries to be socially a little more moderate and then foreign policy wise a hawk. In the debate last time, when asked about abortion, she gave a pretty practical answer, which is, in order for there to be national legislation on abortion, you need total control of the House and you need 60 votes in the Senate and the presidency. It is statistically impossible. Mm-hmm. And that kind of, it's not like a progressive answer, right? She's not liberal on abortion, but that kind of like actual connection to reality is sometimes like pretty jarring in America, that it's like, oh, wow, somebody acknowledged the truth.
That is a really tactical way for her to acknowledge how poisonous reproductive rights issues are in the nation right now. In every single state where the right to reproductive access has been on the ballot, it has won. So she doesn't have to come out and say, we can't win on this issue. The majority of Americans don't want it. She can say, we can't pass this in the Senate right now. We can't pass this and get it signed right now. And that's, I think, in part her reading the tea leaves and actually being intellectually honest about where America is on reproductive rights right now.
And suburban women were seen as one of the key categories, as it's patronizing the way it's described, but the suburban women are seen as a key electoral contingent in 2016, 2020, or 2020. I'm going to ask you both an unfair question. How do you think the next year is going to play out? Let's say Nikki Haley does become Trump's main rival. How do you think that the season's going to develop as Trump spends a lot of his time in court? Katy.
That is a very hard question. I think it's going to be up and down. So that's if Haley is the main challenger. Haley v. Biden, what's that look like? I think it'll be really interesting to see what happens on foreign policy and how much of a position that takes and whether or not that hurts or helps Biden, because I think there's a lot of friction in the progressive arena on how that's been handled lately. I think he's going to have to really lean on his assistance for veterans and all of the funding that he's been sending back to local cities and states. He's done a ton in terms of recovery money and infrastructure money, but it is not messaged well and it's not really known of. We didn't name these bills like funding our communities or fixing the climate. We named them the Inflation Reduction Act and the Recovery Act, So I think that there's a lot of messaging work to prove that he's delivering results and also that he's competent and that he's strong intellectually and making decisions, because when I go through like a qualitative research project that I recently did to see what people think of Biden, everybody's unsure and everybody thinks he's old. So you might strongly support him, you might strongly disapprove of him, you might be somewhere in the middle, but everyone is unsure about him and everyone thinks he's old.
Mike, you're wearing your Biden t-shirts. The question I actually was asking, but the great answer there was actually about Trump's fortunes next year as he spends his time in and out of court. I mean, it would seem to me that he is going to be the candidate, but one doesn't know what kind of legal jeopardy he has. Mike, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, the problem in America with the whole primary system is always the same, and that you have to run to your base during the primaries and then you try to drift to the center. And so what DeSantis did was try to run to the right of Donald Trump for some reason. But Donald Trump has that so locked up that that's where I think DeSantis stalled out. And then that kind of made a lot of his money people nervous. And Nikki Haley ran more to the center of Trump, which makes her in general to the media and everybody more popular. But the people who are still going to be turning out to caucus, to primary, are diehard Trump supporters. For any number of reasons, you would have to ask them. And so Nikki Haley still, it is a long shot that she would ever be able to beat Trump. And so then you have these, so then you do these, far out polls of Trump, versus Biden. And I think the Biden people kind of panicked because the polls showed Trump beating Biden by like 6%. But then those same polls had Trump losing to generic Democrat by like 8%. So a generic Democrat is blowing Trump out of the water, but this particular Democrat is losing to Trump. Now, we do a lot of work with like the DNC, just kind of casual messaging. We'll do some like merchandise product. We work with a lot of progressive campaigns. And so this isn't like top secret information. But if you're the DNC, you are kind of like, how do we get, not only Joe Biden more likable,
National Committee.
The Democratic National Committee. And then so there's the re-election campaign, and then there's the Democratic National Committee. But then they're also struggling with how do we make Kamala Harris more likable? Kamala is one of those that I don't know if this was Biden's thinking, but maybe he was thinking, I'm going to be a one-term president and then Kamala will run instead of me. But Kamala has never really gotten a lot of traction. And on the Democratic side, you say, okay, Joe Biden steps aside. Well, who takes his place? Generic Democrat sounds great, but Democrats just, I think Republicans do it too, love just picking apart every single candidate. So they have problems with Buttigieg, they have problems with Harris, they have problems with Elizabeth Warren. It's just,
what's the population of the United States? What's the population of the United States?
350 million, I think, about.
And you can only get 2 octogenarians to.
Oh my God, it is. I'm as surprised as you are. I mean, when you walk around, people are not sure how they got into this place. I think The Simpsons had a quote once where it was like, it's like a mule with a spinning wheel. Don't know how he got it. Darned if he knows how to use it. And I think we're sitting at that point. Like, I don't know how we got here.
Yeah. Okay.
I think it is a tough issue, though. Like, it just reminds me of when I tried to figure out who I was caucusing for. I mean, I was working on the 2020 caucuses on a rural economic campaign, and I'm following all of these 20-odd Democratic presidentials around. And at the end of the day, I'm just like, my brain is hurting. Like, who do I actually like? Who am I voting for? And I sat down and realized, like, none of these people have a vision for my generation. And it's really frustrating. So that is an issue where folks like even younger than us are going to be wondering, like, what are these folks doing? What are they doing for climate change? What are they doing for progressive? Well, when it comes back to our side, obviously, like, what are we doing for progressive issues that the next generation really cares about?
Katy, you had a good series of elections, though, earlier this month.
Yes.
Pennsylvania, Ohio had the ballot
Yes.
on abortion too. So just tell us about those. I mean, those were significant victories for Democrats.
Yeah, and a lot of people are a lot of folks are leaning into using reproductive rights as a wedge. And I mean, obviously, Ohio, they added that protection to their constitution. The Virginia governor ran on a 15-week abortion ban and saw all of his legislative candidates lose. I'm a little less familiar with the Pennsylvania win. I'm sorry, I can't think of what. Mike, do you know what that was?
Yeah, I mean, Pennsylvania was another where it kind of drifted. There weren't any big issues on the ballot, but Ohio is a state that Trump won easily, and abortion was like 60-40 victory, so not even close. They also legalized marijuana, which was on the ballot. Similarly, 2 years ago, Kansas abortion was a 60-40 win, and Kansas is even more conservative than Ohio. So and I think Virginia is telling in that, Youngkin, who is this, he's the governor of Virginia and kind of a rising star in the party, really did kind of leaned into abortion and lost badly, lost all of it. All his momentum is now gone. Ohio, what you saw, which is one of my least favorite aspects of kind of the anti-abortion crowd, is they all kind of try to muddy the waters and drift away from the message. Like, oh, it's not a 6-week ban. And so the Ohio ones drifted a little bit towards the middle to make it a little more confusing what you were voting towards, and still got blown away. And I would think Kansas from a few years ago showed that abortion was a losing issue. And now between like Virginia and Ohio, it is a total loser. People in general, I think in America, whether it's marijuana or abortion, when it's on the ballot, tend to opt for freedom, unfortunately.
Yeah. But in a way, you described it really well, that division between the sort of the messaging and the culture wars at a national level, and then things that really matter to you at a local level, when you're not just talking about ideas and ideology, you're actually talking about the books in the library, or whether your daughter is going to be able to get an abortion if something goes wrong, whatever she's got that right to do or not.
Yeah, I think it's always the same of, you don't mind taking it away as long as it's somebody else. But then as soon as it is actually you, then it's like, well, now wait a minute. I have the, wherewithal to make a decision with all the facts. I thought you were talking about somebody else who doesn't have the wherewithal to make that. I don't mind taking other people's books away or defunding other schools, but when it's my schools. And that's what you see is that, in my personal opinion, on the Republican side, even the things that they have passed, like school vouchers, defunding public schools, you've seen long-term losers. Michigan, which has gone blue, was really red in the 90s and pioneered school vouchers, and they are now slowly rolling all of those back with huge Democratic majorities. Wisconsin is starting the process of rolling back their school vouchers. Kansas, which was, there was a famous book called What's the Matter with Kansas, which asked the question, why do people on the right vote for policies that are not in their interest? Kansas now has a Democratic governor, a much more moderate legislature, and has raised all of their taxes to fund public schools. Because as those public institutions start to fail, and they will over 1 to 2 decades, people turn out. I mean, it turns out that people actually like a lot of those public institutions and don't want them failing.
I'd love to get questions, people. We're over half an hour in, and I need some questions from our lovely viewers. So I've got Howard Gatiss, who's most probably in London, and we'll have him up in just a second to put his question directly to you. So we can bring him up, Karam. There he is. Good. Howard, ask your question.
It's obviously very easy to take a top-down approach when you're 2,000 miles away. But it would seem to be the case that if the difference between vote Biden and vote generic Democrat is somewhere between 10 percentage points and 15 percentage points, is there no one in the Democratic Party, either an individual who can garner support or a committee or somebody who can say, we've got a year to to politely ditch Biden and get somebody else and win?
Katy, it's not going to happen, is it?
It's not going to happen. And when Mike laid out the difference in, Biden versus Trump, generic Democrat versus Trump, the thing is, if you do that poll like 9 months, 12 months later, and let's face it, polls aren't always super consistent or reliable, Biden becomes the generic Democrat. Like at that point, there isn't some other option floating around in your head. That gets back to what he was saying about just liking to dislike something in the moment. But the ability to kind of get there isn't a who would be that person right now. And to generate that kind of money, support, messaging around someone to challenge the sitting president and win, and what that what that could or couldn't do to the actual party to then win the general election. It's a huge risk. I think it sounds really scary to me, and it's not feasible.
Okay, Mike, but just for the fun of it, chuck out some names. Anybody you can think of who would elicit that kind of support?
No, I mean, honestly, we have sat here, we're like progressive group, and I cannot think of a single one. The only people, at the national level, anybody who ran against Biden the last time, whether I said, Bernie to Elizabeth Warren to Kamala Harris to Pete Buttigieg, I don't think any of them could do it for any number of reasons. The rising stars currently in the Democratic Party are, Michigan Governor Gretchen Whitmer, Illinois Governor Pritzker. I think those two are ones that will come on, but it's not going to be in the next year. Even they would see it would be crazy for them to jump in right now. I think how this will go, to Katie's point, is people, everybody's complaining right now, even though things in America seem to be good. It's one of those, the recession is right around the corner. Everyone has been literally saying for 18 months. I mean, I wanted to screenshot the Bloomberg headlines of the number of times the recession was a month away. I think people like Donald Trump in theory as a, protest vote, but when it comes down to it, any moderate person in the election, I mean, I hate to make projections because, again, I thought Hillary was going to win and I didn't even see this global pandemic coming. And that was a big one. That was, and it's like, I had no idea. There I was.
How could you not miss it, Mike?
February 2020, just sailing along. Everything's going to be fine. But if I were going to guess, people are going to look at it and say like, hey, Joe Biden's not really making headlines. I don't have to hear about him. He's not an embarrassment. The economy's doing fine, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I'll just give him 4 more years rather than deal with Trump's BS. And I think that's where it'll come out. Trump is the best candidate for Biden to run against because most of the vote is going to be not Donald Trump. And to Katie's point, Biden will become just generic Democrat. And they say, well, whatever. The system kind of runs itself. He's at least not going to be sand in the gears like Trump would be.
Yeah. I'm waiting for your Biden T-shirt. Richard Murphy, your question. Go ahead, Richard.
Yeah, just want to ask about what the plan is to get the younger vote out and really deliver next year. And I think in particular, we're getting talk over here about this Taylor Swift effect. And is she really going to be able to motivate people to register to vote and then vote?
The Swiftie effect is real. Governor Tim Walz of Minnesota proclaimed a day in honor of Taylor Swift when she was coming through for her Eras tour because of her effect on the economy. I mean, her tour generates billions across the country, everywhere she goes. This Travis Kelce romance is getting like a whole generation of women who wouldn't be interested in football, interested in watching football. I think if Swift were to do a lot of GOTV, it would have a big effect. But on a bigger level, like obviously you're not going to get those younger votes unless you start having real conversations on things they care about, a big one being climate change. And doing things that are going to help their futures. I think there's a whole lot of work to be done. I think that they see some promises as broken. No matter how much Biden tried to do something on education debt, it didn't pan out. So it doesn't really matter what the hurdle was, right? You told me I was going to get something and I didn't get it. And that's a huge issue for a lot of people who are struggling financially right now. I mean, kids graduating college and high school today are having a really hard time affording rent, even thinking of buying a house. And a lot of them might even be wondering, what's the point? Climate change is going to ruin it all. So it's pretty pessimistic, but I think it's where a lot of the youth are right now. Although we are, and this is very Iowa specific, we are seeing some awesome stuff out of our youth. We have a group called Iowa What the Fuck, Iowa WTF. That kind of came out when our governor and others were attacking gender binary folks, LGBTQ individuals in their school, banning books that talk about them, telling them what bathrooms they can and can't use, getting into their assigned at birth sex. And these kids are standing up for their friends and their peers, and they really do bring a lot of hope for, what's possible.
Okay, GOTV, get out the vote.
Yeah, and I, not to be like a downer on the Taylor Swift thing, but they said, oh, Taylor Swift told people to go out and register to vote, and there was a huge surge in people going out and register to vote. She's got hundreds of millions of followers. 30,000 people registered to vote because she posted it. But that's across the entire country, which if you've got 30 million followers and only could get 30,000 registered to vote, I don't know if that's the greatest success rate. So the headline doesn't match. Also, I was graduating college in 2004. That was Bush v. Kerry. So Iraq War, I was living out east, so I was in Philadelphia. I think I saw one Bush sticker. I thought it was going to be 90-10, an absolute Bush would demolish him. And Puff Daddy did a vote or die campaign and brought all of his celebrity friends, and there was skyscraper-sized posters of vote or die with Puff Daddy on it, and then 50 Cent and all these celebrities. And not sure how well everybody knows history, but Kerry lost. I mean, all the celebrities came out, and it was because just there has to be a likability. Obama won not because the celebrities were necessarily for him, but it's like, man, that guy was so GD likable. And everyone, was able to instill a hope for the future. I think Biden will still win, but again, it's going to be a vote against Trump. I think young people will turn out, but you don't have a candidate who is like a personal vehicle of positive vision. I do think there's a lot of younger people on the, to Katie's point, gender issues, book issues that are motivated, but it's more, kind of the politically minded youth organizing base. And I don't see it. I don't know. There is kind of an apathy, a disconnection. There's just not a lot of, which I can, totally understand. I mean, I'm not even personally fired up about Biden, and I'm like a 43-year-old
well, against
with
that,
an
you
IRA.
can possibly get fired up about a second Trump presidency. So, Katie, what do you think a second Trump presidency might entail? What has he been saying? What has he been promising? Immigration, for example.
Well, the last time he was president, he kind of set off little bombs throughout the government to kind of make it work less efficiently. He moved a climatologist who was working on Arctic icebergs to accounting. And he did that all over the administration. So number one, he's going to do things like that. He reduced the number of safety inspectors on food inspection lines. A less safe, less functioning government is what he wants, because that's part of his narrative. Government is bad. It doesn't work well. Go private. Pay people like me to run your city, run your schools. Pay Betsy DeVos and her cohort to take care of private schools and educate your kids. Everything he did to the Supreme Court bench to make sure that evangelicals got their wish on Roe versus Wade. He's just going to double down. I handled climate policy when he was in president the first time. It was exhausting. I think I became a little inhuman during that period of time, just a robot trying to fight back everything he threw at being able to put coal ash in water, being able to drill and lease wherever you want, extend leases, tear up some of our most iconic lands and dig into oil reserves that purposefully aren't being utilized because, they're in precious spaces. So I don't think he'll hold back at all.
Well, he doesn't really have any new stuff. I mean, the new stuff is all the sideshow. The policy, I couldn't name one single policy that is new for him. It's kind of, the policy side is this boring retread, but in now this third season,
I think he wants to create concentration camps for migrants. They're going to pick up and put them in.
I think the main thing for this third season, you forget that his big thing is television. And the reason why he's spending so much time in court is now that's the theme of the third season, is the courts versus him. And it's policy he couldn't care less about. It's, the system is trying to destroy me, so you have to elect me as a big middle finger to the system. So you're not really electing him for any sort of new policies. You're electing him to really, stick it to whoever. I get any number of courts that he's in right now, from state to local to federal.
But we're going to have to wrap it up shortly. I'm going to come back to in just a second for a follow-up question, because I know I have plenty. Just is for the caucuses in January. How do you think it's going to go?
On the Republican candidate. if I were going to guess, I would think Trump will win easily. I think Nikki Haley will be second. I think DeSantis will kind of fizzle out if I were going to guess. I don't know why Reynolds, endorsed him. I think she's the first Republican, or for the first governor to ever endorse before the caucuses, which was like a huge no-no in Iowa because you thought picking sides would then upset the party and they would move Iowa out of first place. So traditionally, the Iowa governor has never picked a candidate. I have no idea why she picked one and why she picked a guy who seems like a guaranteed loser in my opinion. So I think he's distant third. Chris Christie will drop out probably the day after the caucuses, if not before.
I completely agree. I think that's the writing on the wall, at least for now. The only thing I wonder about why she picked, why she decided to endorse DeSantis is if she's getting some sort of feedback loop on what these 14th Amendment fights are going to do. But honestly, that doesn't make sense to me because, telling Trump he can't run and taking him off the ballot, I think you have to, whether or not he should be allowed to be on that ballot, I think Biden has to beat him on the ballot in the court of public opinion and public voting, because if you just tell him he can't be on the ballot, that makes me nervous about, whether or not we could have another January 6th. So I think that I think the people fighting those fights and dealing with that state by state, somebody there's got to know that and have some input on the direction those are going.
Yeah, and all of the legal issues would be, you all will need like a 4-hour discussion. The 14th Amendment is even kind of an inside baseball of whether, the Constitution allows Trump to be on the ballot. Although I think that was taken to trial in Minnesota, but it didn't. The Minnesota court said, no, he will be allowed to be on the ballot in Minnesota. So I think
there's two other states fighting, like taking it up to, like Colorado, and I forget the other, but Michigan.
And I think with the New York trial, he's not facing jail time, but his, properties will probably be repossessed by the state and then sold, and he won't be able to do business in New York, which I think is personally damaging to him, but he's not facing jail time. The classified documents is the one where you're like, if you were going to teach a class about how somebody is guilty of something, he is so clearly guilty, whether you think there's too many classified documents in America, on and on and on. It's like he knowingly took them. He's been recorded telling people he knows they're still classified, that he didn't declassify them, and that he could get in big trouble. And obviously with the lock her up chance, has told thousands of people he knew what the law was and the law should be stronger. The only thing keeping him out of, America has put so many people in jail for that same law. There was that Air Force lieutenant in Massachusetts just a few weeks ago, or a few months ago, who went to jail for the same thing. We put so many people in jail for those reasons. The only thing keeping Donald Trump out of jail is just that he's Donald Trump. But who knows how his legal stuff is going to play out.
I've dropped out, everyone. So did Audrey get her question in?
No, that just
Audrey
came through.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, Audrey.
Yeah.
Yeah, go on, Audrey.
I want to know why Biden is given no credit for all the programs he has instituted, like infrastructure, the chips, voter issues, and all the other things. These are programs that all generations benefit from. He might be the age he is, but he's done a lot of work. He's classy.
I'm in 100% agreement. Biden put forth one of the most progressive slates in the last 70 years. He is the only sitting president to march on a picket line with the UAW. So he has appealed to the left wing. He has managed the economy amazingly. Amazingly. He has when we look back on this era, this will be when America has avoided some of the biggest potential pitfalls politically and economically. In my opinion, from a actual accomplishment standpoint, Biden is probably one of the best presidents in the last 50 years. And he has got to even think to himself, how do I not get credit for? You don't want to compare anybody to Jimmy Carter, but when Jimmy Carter was like, it's a crisis of confidence, he said that during an actual collapse. Biden is doing great, but for some reason doesn't get credit for it. I don't know. He puts out this progressive slate, and it's supposed to be a signal to Democrats to say, hey, here's all the laws I want to pass. If you give me the Senate and the House, we'll pass it all. But for some reason, that doesn't motivate the base.
Katy, it's his age, isn't it? It's his age. He just doesn't seem with it.
I think it's just the times too. Yeah.
It's not just his age. I think that, so to those of us on this call, like that information is awesome. Like knowing these bills passed, like we're paying attention. We're like, yeah, he passed this bill, that bill. It's all helping my community. I can go to a little website and I can see where exactly these funds came and if my county supervisors voted for it or against it, which is part of the weeds. But a lot of people don't pay attention to politics and infrastructure and stuff like that. It's not a great messaging thing to talk about. People want to hear about, I don't know, the big flashy things that Trump is really good at talking about, but talking about infrastructure is really hard. So that's actually something a lot of people are working on right now, trying to figure out how do we message on infrastructure and these investments. And it comes down to making it a little bit more relational. And Biden has to do more. Biden and everyone attached to Biden and his campaign has to do a lot more messaging on Biden is putting money in your pocket, that feels like a lie because people aren't getting.
Katy, you got to be. I mean, he comes across as old, hesitant. I mean, Audrey was with
he
us
needs to be forceful. He needs to have strength, and they need to do. I think they are starting to try, but they need to do a much better job of talking about what he has done, what he has passed, and what it's doing in your community. I think Medicare is huge. Being able to negotiate on the price of prescription drugs is going to be something that he needs to go to every deli lunch and Legion Hall and talk about what he's doing on Medicare. He's been giving some of the biggest investments in veteran care. Is it Vietnam vets can now get 100% free healthcare no matter where you go.
I think it is a real uphill battle because if you look at, media engagement has fallen off a cliff since Trump left. And I don't think it's because of interest in Trump. I think it is just exhaustion that you had 2016 to 2020 was such a catastrophic 4 years capped off with January 6th that a lot of people just kind of checked out. Even if you had a charismatic Democratic
you know what?
leader.
You're dead right. I would wake up every morning and I'd read the New York Times and I would wait, what's next? And then when Trump was no longer in power,
I mean, when I would drive, if I'm driving to work listening, if I'm driving to work listening to public radio and something about Joe Biden is not in the top news, I think to myself, this guy's doing a great job. He's doing it. I don't want to hear from him at all. And so I think 2016 to 2020 was so exhausting that a lot of people have kind of checked out. It's not even like we're not making the information available. They're not even interested in looking. And unfortunately, it's Biden and his administration are picking up the pieces of that total collapse, putting everything back together, and really won't get credit for it, not because the messaging was bad, but because you're pushing a rope on messaging right now. There is apathy even on the engaged side. The people who were on Facebook just spitting nails a few years ago are now kind of like taking a break. They're taking a step back
Katy,
for their own mental health.
I'm jumping in here. Katy, does it matter, on the progressive side, the leftist side, people will be very angry with Biden's offering so much support to Israel and basically giving Israel a free hand. I know that's less so now as the Israeli campaign in Gaza has gone on. But certainly if you think of, Dearborn, Michigan, you think of both left-leaning and certainly among Arab voters, they'd be losing. He would be losing his vote. He would be losing their vote.
I don't know. I know it's a tightrope he's been walking. It's a tough issue. It's not one I've followed for very, very long. It's a hard issue for anyone to really talk about. I think that a lot of folks in that arena would have just loved a strong, compassionate statement on no genocide. No genocide anywhere for anyone. I do think what Mike just said is very true on apathy. I think that people are very unengaged. They're very sick of politics. I do a message training briefing every single Friday, and there are a few things I tell every single person who attends every single time, and that is to remember to have some compassion, give people some credit because they're very tired. They're very tired financially. They're very, very tired politically. And so to ask them to do something, to engage in politics, to pay attention, you've got to remember to say, like, I know you're working hard. I know that, like, it's been a tough time. But we also remind people to start with a value and relate anything economically to like a 1 degree point from someone's life. You don't talk about this intangible economic thing that exists that the right likes to say. It goes up and down and it affects your life. When in reality, we have these leaders who are making decisions about how much money goes to your school, how much money goes to your roads, whether or not your CEO can sell windfall profits and keep paying you less than you deserve. So we're really pushing folks to talk about like really broad-based values and things that people already believe in, and it does work. And I'm on national messaging calls at least once every other week. And we're seeing that messages that are structured like that really help get the attention of people who don't vote all of the time. And it's not, it's little by little, right? But we do need to talk about policies and politics in a way that people who only listen to the news for 5 minutes a day understand and relate to, because we're a rare group. Most people are working really hard, not making enough, raising kids, maybe getting side gigs and being excited for the side gig because now they can actually afford to make a living. This research project I just dug through got into the biggest concern everybody had was money. And a lot of people were excited that they had like one guy said, I'm excited I have the money to repair my house after a fire. A grandma was worried about whether or not she was going to be able to afford to take care of her grandkids. So everybody's worried, everybody's tired. And we really have to appeal to people who are tired, struggling, and apathetic in a way that appeals to them. No matter how much they're listening, everything has to be tailored to that.
Yeah. Okay.
I think time is on Biden's. I think in general, time is on Biden's side. I mean, I think things are steadily improving. All the accomplishments will catch up. And that's why it'll be interesting for you all to come and check it out from the ground floor, because, wow, things look really different in America from one year to the next. Well,
Mike, we're looking forward to it. Can you just give us a preview? I know you've got a T-shirt next to you on your right-hand side.
Well, yeah, I mean, we'll see what new one we came up with. We did put out the Florida Man Arrested shirt. Historic crime spree span nation, included attempt to steal country's election. And so we'll have to, who knows how many Trump mugshots we'll have in the store by the time you all are here.
Excellent. Well, listen, thank you both very much indeed. It was a really good overview. We've touched all the bases, the candidates, the issues in Iowa, talking about the campaign nationally. We're really looking forward to coming and seeing you in January. Thank you both very much indeed.
Thanks so much. It'll be good seeing everybody.
Okay, thanks very much. Thank you.